and welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris.
And I'm Eric.
And today we're going to cover part 2 of our video series covering choosing your character class.
So in the last episode, we went over different methods to try to choose what class, to figure out what class is right for you. So today we wanted to break down each of the 13 major classes.
Yeah, we'll go into each one at a high level, cover their characteristics, the sort of categories, the little buckets they fall into, any little useful notes for new players, and break them all down for you. All right, let's hit the top of the order with the Artificer.
So the Artificer is interesting because it is a brand new class. It is, I believe, the only class to officially be added post, the original launch of 5e. It came out in 2019 with Eberron, and since then has had some tweaks and additions with Tasha's to streamline the class a little more. So it came out and it was very complicated. And now it's a little more reasonable. It's a little more easy to play, especially for newer players.
Yeah. And so what is this class? This is a tinkerer, somebody who creates items. If you like the idea of maybe like a tinkering gnome or gadgets and gizmos. Powered armor sounds like something cool to control and fight with. Then the Artificer is your jam. I think folks who are really into steampunk and those types of things will really gravitate toward this class. So the categories it falls into. This class is primarily a range damage utility support caster. So he's going to be, or she is going to be there, to really support and augment the party. That's going to be your role. But some things to note, this is more of an advanced class. So just as a new player, know what you're getting into, try and understand the mechanics, talk to your DM. There's limited direct combat ability. So you'll be relying on, your items and your other abilities to get you by. And with their limited magic resources, it can be a little tricky. Next, we have the Barbarian. We were a little rough on the Barb last episode.
The Barbarian is not my favorite class, but it is a lot of people's favorite class and one of the highest damage output classes, which I think is why a lot of people like them. They are forced to be reckoned with. They can fit, kind of the tank role. They have a lot of health. They get a D12 for every level for their health level. And also, they have some of the highest damage output out of any class. So if that is your jam, if you're usually playing a tank or if you're usually wanting to hit big numbers, the Barbarian class is the class for you.
Yes. And the other thing to remember, when you are playing these types of head-on, fisticuffs, martial classes, you're typically engaging one-on-one with your enemies. So if you do anticipate, lots of enemies, this is a class that, can easily get overrun or swarmed over if they don't have good support from their party.
And it's a relatively easy class to play. Yeah. You got a lot of health. You do a lot of damage. You know your role. You charge in and you kill stuff. I would rank this more on the beginner level. Yeah,
very beginner friendly. The only thing else I would say is it can become a little bit of a one-trick pony. Just you're very good at killing stuff.
Yeah, you do one thing, you do it really well.
Yeah, the best. All right, now we're coming up to my personal favorite.
The Bard.
Yes, the charismatic performer who uses magic to cast spells. The Bard is your support caster through and through. They have tremendous utility. They get so many abilities, different spells. They get things that boost their skills, that add proficiency to their skills, so they can just fit so many roles nicely. And so on top of that, because of their high charisma and some of the spells they get, they also serve as a great party leader or face of the party.
Bards, I feel like, are maybe similar to Barbarians. You already have the archetypal Bard in your mind. You know what a Bard is. So that makes them easy to roleplay. You don't have to figure like an Artificer. I mean, maybe I know what an archetypal Artificer is, but it's a little harder for me to create that character. The Bard is so easy for me to know what a Bard is, to place somebody in there, and then maybe work on playing against type and tweaking a few things.
I believe that the Bard is a very roleplay intensive role.
Yes.
So if you are not the kind of player who's inclined to role play, Bard really excels when they are engaged. They're bolstering their teammates. They're influencing the NPCs. That's where they really shine. So a very tight-lipped Bard, I think, can be not quite as fun to play.
Yeah, you're cutting yourself short. I think a bard's utility comes, or usefulness is even more useful outside of combat. They have some great combat utility, great spells. You know, depending on the subclass you choose, can put out a decent amount of damage. But every bard outside of combat is so useful. Mostly talking to NPCs and charming them and you know, greasing the wheels and doing that type of stuff. So yes, if you are not the type of person that wants to role play charming a merchant or trying to talk a guard out of executing your friend or whatever, this might not be the class for you. That is a little more of an advanced play style.
Yeah, because it just requires really, you know, putting yourself out there in these situations.
So going alphabetically, the next class that we are going to talk about is the cleric. Another one of your favorites.
Yeah, these holy warriors and healers, they wield magic through the power of their faith. The cleric is awesome. They heal, they support, and they can even, you know, get in the thick of things. I think this is definitely a very good beginner-friendly class, especially if you're a beginner and looking to you want to sling some spells around, and they're not as squishy as wizards. I remember the what is it in the D&D 5e starter set, the dwarven cleric that they start you with as like a pre-generated. It's the min-maxed version of the character, but it's phenomenal.
It's very good.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, clerics are forgiving for any mistake you make as a player. They can wear chainmail, so they're hardy. They can heal. They can dish out some damage. Yeah. So you can be in a poor position. You can, you know, mess up a round of combat. You can make a lot of mistakes and still provide a lot of value for your party.
Yeah.
They're also really just fun to play. This is a class that, starting out, I was never really interested in, the kind of godly, you know, priest cleric of a deity. That never rang to me until I changed the way that I build characters. Now I can, like I said, I can put almost any character that I imagine into any class. And the cleric class is just so fun. There's just so much to do, so many subdomains. So I'm interested and look forward to playing clerics in the future because I have fun characters I can put into them.
Yeah, it's an incredibly versatile class. And when you dive into those subclasses, you'll see that there's just, one for every option.
Every one of them is interesting. You really could have a group of just clerics.
That might be
and be a well-rounded group.
One thing to note about the cleric, and we'll mention this for the other characters as well. Sometimes the clerics can suffer from what's called multiple ability dependency.
Yes.
And we'll cover this a little more in depth when we talk about ability scores. But essentially what it means is a character like the cleric, or the class like the cleric, is going to require multiple ability scores or stats to kind of be effective. You know, it requires wisdom to cast his spells, but he also needs strength if he wants to deal damage in melee, if that's the build that you're going for. And constitution's also really important for survivability. So sometimes, depending on what build you're going with your cleric, they can kind of get stretched in a few different directions.
And like you said, depending on the subclass, because some of them are more casters, so you can kind of dump strength and you don't have to worry about it as much. But yes, that I would say that would be, if I were to say that the cleric, I think the cleric is very beginner friendly.
Yeah,
that would be the only thing that would put them maybe a little more toward intermediate. But even still, it's such a forgiving class. If your stats aren't perfectly aligned the way that your subclass needs them to be, it's fine. You'll still have fun. You'll still have a very effective character.
Yeah, and it's not as big of a deal in 5e as it was in 3.5, for example, or Pathfinder. But it's just worth noting. The druid, Wow, we're just going like 3 favorites in a row.
All of them are your favorites.
They are. I love the druid. The magic user who wields the forces of nature can shapeshift into wild animals. This class is so much fun to play, to role play. They can fill the role of tank. They can be a support caster. They can be a healer. They can be utility. They can do it all. And then they're so versatile. They're pretty sad, which is the opposite of what we just talked about. They're single ability dependent.
Yes.
So really, you just need your wisdom to cast spells, and then everything else is just icing on the cake. And they're very beginner friendly, especially with access to wild shape and the variety of spells and the different things you can do with them. I think that the druid is a wildly fun class to play, if you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah, druids are kind of broken. Wild shape.
I was gonna say that, but I was holding off because I don't want to piss anyone off.
They are broken. If you want to play a class that you basically can't die, like druid is the class, because once you wild shape into an animal that has a lot of health, you act as the tank. Once you are reduced to 0 hit points while in that wild shape, you turn back into a druid. So then you have your full health pool again. It's incredible. It's like an end boss. Like you beat them once and then they kneel down and their full health bar regenerates and they're back up.
I'm back.
Druids are incredibly fun. Again, I think kind of easy to role play. There is a character that is the druid. We all know him. We went to school with him. You know, he's you know who that person is.
Oh yeah.
It's easy to play that. And I feel like, again, once it's easy to identify what the stereotypical druid is, it's easier then to start adding things that are against type and folding in nuance and different things like that. So this character I do recommend to new players. It's really fun. It's really interesting. It's not something you're going to get in a lot of other games, like video games or things that our players might be familiar with before coming to tabletop. So it's just a really fun way to start your Dungeons and Dragons career.
Yeah. And, you know, with the druid, there's also a lot of utility just being connected to the natural world, which you might often find yourself in while exploring, you know, whatever campaign you're off journeying.
Yeah.
Being able to talk to an animal or converse with plants sounds boring, I know. But I've had conversations with ferns that would just knock you off your ass.
It's one of those things that I feel like a lot of, and we'll probably do a video later on about these things, that players tend to ignore these skills, these attributes, these spells.
Yeah. That
really, if you focus on it, can change your game.
Oh yeah.
And druids have that stuff in spades.
Yeah.
So the next class we're going to be talking about is one of my personal favorites, the fighter. The fighters are martial masters. They are your get in the crowd, mix it up melee, typical armor clad. They're what you think of when you think of a knight a lot of times. I think fighters are incredibly versatile. I just love this class because they are a lot of times my blank slate to put whatever wacky character I have created on top of, and no matter what, it fits.
Yeah. You have to ask yourself, does your character stab things? If yes, fighter works.
Yes. And not even really like with the subclasses or even the like martial archetypes. Does my character shoot a bow?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Take the bow. And you're going to a lot of times out damage your ranger. They are just an incredible class. They put out a ton of damage. They can take a lot of damage. Their subclasses are all interesting. Battlemaster is my personal favorite.
Well, talk about that too, because you know, as a fighter, you think, well, I'm just going to be hitting or stabbing or shooting. What am I doing outside of that? Can you kind of go into a little bit of that?
You do tend to think, I'm just going to hit it with my sword. That's going to be, that's going to get old after a while, even if those numbers are, big numbers popping off. The Battlemaster in the subclass for the fighter has a secondary mechanic called combat superiority, and you have these superiority dice. And you used them, I think you get them like 3 at the beginning. You use them for what's called maneuvers, which are basically spells. Like putting it simply.
Stabbing spells.
stabbing spells. So you're good enough with whatever weapon you chose to have an extra effect on top of hitting. So I hit a character with my sword, or I hit an NPC with my sword, and roll a superiority die or spend in a superiority die to knock them down, or to move them, or to make them only hit me, a goading attack. So you add a lot more utility. If, my cleric's coming up and I know that they might not have as good a chance to hit this character as this NPC as I do, I'm going to knock him down. So now we both have advantage on that guy. If my wizard is near and I think that this monster might hit my wizard, I'm going to goading attack it so it only hits me. So there's just so much more utility you can add to the battlefield as a battle master and as a fighter in general. I mean, all the fighter subclasses are really, really strong. That one's just my personal favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to have at least one fighter in your group.
Yeah, they're versatile. I mean, versatility is kind of the name of a lot of these classes, especially when you get into subclasses, but the fighter can tank easily. They can damage deal easily. They can ranged damage easily, which I think a lot of people sleep on, because all of those mechanics with the battle master that I mentioned, you can do those with a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
You don't have to be hitting somebody with an axe or a sword. You can be in the back also and knock somebody prone. And move somebody, make them only come after you, whatever it is.
And we talked about this in part 1, where you can have multiple characters of the same class, and be wildly different in terms of your role and how you play.
Even in the fighter class, even in the martial or in the battle master subclass, if one of you picks duelist and one of you picks, the bow and arrow, you have wildly different play styles. Or if one of you is a protector, you're more of the tank role. So even within the same subclass, you can have different roles. Yeah.
So very beginner friendly, the fighter. It is another sad class, so you can invest in strength or dexterity, max out your con next, and you're good to go. You don't really need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, I agree. You have your main stat, which is whatever if you're hitting with big weapons, you're going to need strength. If you're hitting with dexterity weapons or finesse weapons, you need your dexterity. After that, your constitution, so you stay alive. Everything else is gravy. You can be dumb. You're not wise. I tend to like to put the rest of my points in charisma, because out of combat, a lot of times is more than in combat, and I need to be able to talk to people.
Yeah. You need to be a little friendly. All right, that brings us next to the monk.
The monk.
Yes, another martial class, but one that uses their ki and agility to overwhelm their foes. Now, the monk is more of a hit and run, very mobile, very fast melee character. I think they're advanced because they're generally not as well armored, even though they do have some defenses to kind of help mitigate that. They're very resource intensive. In certain subclasses, eat up a lot of ki.
Yes.
To execute those moves. They're a little mad. You need dex for your main, attacking and armor. Your wisdom also contributes to your armor class based off of unarmored defense. You probably want some con to stay healthy and not get taken down in one hit. The monks also have strength as a saving throw, even though it's typically their dump stat. So they're kind of pulled in a few different directions there. Yeah. But that's not to say that the monk can't be an excellent class. You just really have to know the mechanics of the monk and really be able to use them in combat effectively. The other thing, I've just kind of casually observed is the monk's utility, outside of combat. What are they doing? I've seen some really useful ones, and I've seen some ones who haven't really done jack squat.
And I think that comes to what we've talked about before. If you have a character first and then you choose a class, you will have, I feel like, more utility outside of combat, because you're going to know what this character is going to want to do. What personality they have. A lot of times I feel like, again, if you just choose a class, you're only choosing its combat abilities a lot of times. So
it feels that way.
It's hard then to figure out what they're going to do outside of combat.
Yeah. And again, creating the person first is one tactic to kind of help mitigate that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. Now the monk is the battlefield controller. They stun, they move things. They have a lot of battlefield utility, but they're not going to put out as much damage as the other martial classes.
Yeah, if you want to do that, you've got to spend a lot of key points.
Yeah, yes. And that's another resource you've got to kind of maintain and figure out. You don't want to dump them all on the first thing and then you have no key to stun people or to do whatever. So it is a little bit more of an advanced class. And you've got to know that you are trading off that damage for utility a lot of times.
Yeah, you're always giving up something.
You're always giving up something. There's not a single class that does everything.
Yeah, and I think it's just knowing what trade-offs you're making and being okay with that and embracing it.
Yeah,
will definitely help you enjoy your whatever class you choose a lot more.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to the Paladin.
The Paladin.
Yeah.
Holy Warriors. So the Paladins they're very interesting. I really like Paladins also. They're another class similar to the Cleric that I was not interested in originally. For the same reasons I wasn't interested in the Cleric.
Yeah.
But being able to work around that type of like devoted to, a god mentality, Paladins are very fun to play.
Yeah, and they offer phenomenal role-playing capability too.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you start getting like conflicted choices that come up where it's like, okay, when I have to balance what I want to do versus what this character wants to do versus their oath, all of these different factors, that can be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Paladin's oath should drive all of their actions. But like you said, a good DM is going to challenge that in interesting ways.
Yeah.
That aren't easy. It's not an easy choice.
Yeah. Because if, that's the source of a Paladin's power. And if they deviate from that oath, there could be consequences. Which is, and I'm not like just saying like as flavor, as a Paladin, you could lose your powers in the game. Yeah. If you take choices that are counter to your oath. It's important. So
there's a whole subclass about it. And that's interesting because that doesn't happen to the Cleric, I don't believe. That doesn't happen to the Warlock. That doesn't happen to, the Wizard isn't going to lose their powers for whatever reason and have to take like a new subclass because they, made their master angry. Yeah. So that adds just a lot of cool role-playing elements into this class.
Yeah, and you might even want that to be part of your character. Like, I want this Fall from Grace story arc for my character. That's really cool. But choose a Paladin if you want to be a tank, healer, support caster, melee damage, party leader. They fit into a lot of different roles, which is great. They're very versatile. They are mad. You're going to need charisma for your spell casting. You're going to need strength to wear plate armor and do melee damage, and you're also going to need constitution to keep your health up while you're engaged in the front lines. So because of that, they can also kind of be pulled in different directions. But I mean, we played with a Paladin, I think when in a Strahd campaign, and in a single smite was able to just crush some really powerful enemies, for which we were grateful because we were underleveled in that game.
They can put out a lot of damage. They are a very, I would say they're not as forgiving as the Cleric, but they're forgiving because you've got plate, you can heal, you can put out a ton of damage. Your auras are really interesting and cool. They have limited resources. They have very limited spell slots and a limited spell book that they can pull from. But most Paladins that I've ever played with, and when I've played one, I, to be honest, don't care about my spells. I'm using those spell slots for smites.
It's a class where you can just get in the thick of it and not really have to worry a whole lot. It's more of the martial side of the Cleric class, if I could make that comparison. If you would draw the line between them, Cleric would be a little more caster, and Paladin is more martial. Yeah. All right, moving on. Ranger Danger. So this is a class that, bless the Ranger's heart.
Bless their hearts.
The Ranger did not get a lot of love when 5e first came out. To say that it was terrible is kind of an understatement. It wasn't good.
They were widely regarded as the worst class in the book. again, a fighter with a bow could outdamage them.
Yeah.
Their spell choices were very limited.
Limited
Their
skills, the skills that you would
limited skills.
use. A lot of games didn't even include those mechanics, so
Mm-hmm.
we won't talk about that. They did bring in some revisions. I think that originated from the Unearthed Arcana to update the Ranger because it's such an iconic class.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of Drizzt, you think of Strider or Aragorn from Lord of the Rings,
Mm-hmm.
like Legolas as well. You know, you think of these, you know, bow wielding, scimitar slinging survivalists. It's just who wouldn't want to play one of those?
Yeah, Robin Hood, another easy, you know, Ranger archetype.
Yeah. So these are woodsy, outdoorsy survivalists that have, you know, they're very good at tracking foes. They're very good at gaining the advantage in combat. With these characters, you're focused on either range damage or melee damage. So you kind of have to pick one or the other.
Yes.
They have paths for either. This is going to be a really good class if you're doing any kind of survival type campaigns. They offer a lot of utility and support. But I feel like this class can be a little more advanced. You have to really rely on the mechanics, keeping distance between you and your foes, or relying on your different melee abilities to, you know, to survive. You do have limited resources in terms of the spells that are available. And then Rangers can also suffer from MAD as well. So you need either strength or dex for your, you know, martial combat abilities. You're going to need wisdom to cast spells like a druid, but then you're also going to need a lot of constitution to kind of, you know, up your survivability. So you got to be careful when you're building your ranger.
Yeah, Rangers are a fun class now.
Yeah, there's a lot more options too, subclasses.
There's a lot more options. So if you are interested in building a Ranger, if the character you have in mind is obviously a Ranger, don't do it off of the player's handbook. Look at some of the newer resources, dip into the Unearthed Arcana, go online and find the updated Ranger class. You will have much more fun. So next up, we have the Rogue, another one of my personal favorites. Rogues focus on stealth. They are the stealthy shadow dwellers. They're lock pickers. They're backstabbers. They're generally, I don't know, just really, really fun to play.
Yes.
They do a lot of things that other classes can't. Not well, at least. Everybody can sneak in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. You might have disadvantage if we were in plate mail because you're just making a lot of noise. Everyone can sneak. When I first came into Dungeons and Dragons for 3.5, my major experience with this class was from World of Warcraft. So I was like, yes, I want to go invisible. That's not what stealth is. You are literally sneaking around. So finding shadows and doing things to help, you know, hiding in a bush, behind a door, kind of whatever it is.
Yeah.
You need to find things that help you in your stealth journey, you know, in your plan. You are not invisible. But they do it so well. They're almost invisible.
Yeah. And yeah, so stealth, evasion, they do great range damage. They can do great melee damage with their backstabbing. And just a great utility class.
Sneak attack would be their kind of main attack damage. Another thing, a misconception, you do not have to do this with daggers. You can shoot somebody with a bow and sneak attack them from far away, from the safety of behind your wizard.
Yes,
you know?
Which is the best place to be.
The best place to be. Put the wizard between me and them. I know I'm safe. Because they're going to go after the wizard first.
And when you're playing a rogue, the thing to really keep in mind is, you know, your positioning and your party. So in order to really leverage their sneak attacks, to get that extra damage bonus, you either have to, you know, be hidden and stab or hit somebody, or that enemy needs to be adjacent or engaged otherwise with an enemy.
Yes.
So that kind of represents them being distracted, you slipping your dagger between their ribs when they're not looking, or, you know, shooting them with an arrow when their back is turned. But that, I mean, the damage difference, the output, and the benefit that has, I mean, it's well worth to optimize your play style for, you know, taking advantage of that mechanic.
Definitely. You should almost never spend an attack without getting sneak attack.
Yeah. But a lot of it's, you know, either like working with your party, or positioning yourself to get that and then get out. Because rogues aren't very tough.
No. Yeah, you don't want to get hit.
Yeah, and this is another sad class. So Dex is going to be their primary attribute, and then everything else will fall into place based on what character you're actually creating.
Yeah, if you want your rogue to also be the face of the party, put some into charisma.
Yeah.
If you do plan on using daggers and kind of mixing it up, put some into constitution.
Yeah. The arcane trickster can be a magical rogue, and
exactly,
you're going to favor some more intelligence in that matter.
Some intel, yeah. So your base stat, dexterity, pump it full of that. Everything else, it's up to you.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to the sorcerer. Now, this is an interesting class, one that I've not played yet.
Actually, neither of us have.
We've played with them, but we've not had experience directly. This is a magic wielder who uses meta magic to shape and otherwise manipulate the magical forces. Very cool. Yes. They wield spells in unique ways. This is going to be your spell damage, field control, range damage, that sort of class. But they have a lot of interesting mechanisms and just a different flavor on the caster class, whereas the wizard is very book scholarly type. You think kind of Gandalf. A sorcerer is more, maybe they get their power from draconic sources, or wild magic power from fey lines that run through the world.
Sorcerers are interesting because these are people in Dungeons and Dragons, in the lore, you get magic from different places. Clerics get them from their deities. Warlocks get them from their patrons. Wizards basically go to college and learn magic from tomes and masters. Sorcerers are just born with magic. Through whatever reason, they like Chris said, they could have draconic bloodline, they could have fey ancestry, but they are born with magic. So that is a huge difference.
Yeah.
Insofar for me as role playing, you're maybe a little more cocky than everybody else because you're just naturally magic. You didn't have to go to wizard school. You didn't have to sell part of your soul. I don't have to be devout.
I was born this way.
I can just do this. So that's a really interesting role playing aspect for me when I think about sorcerers.
Yeah. So there's different lines where you can kind of invoke some of those draconic abilities. There's wild magic that will kind of create random spell effects. There's a lot of really great options, but really if you want to blow stuff away, then sorcerer is a great option because it gives you a chance. There's a lot of times when you're fighting or engaged in combat, you're just like, oh, man, all I want to do is blow these fools up with a fireball spell. Game over. But I got my fighter in the way. I've got my cleric standing over there. The halfling is trying to stab him in the back.
Yeah.
What's a sorcerer to do? Well, with a sorcerer, you can just throw that fireball right on top of them all and use your magic, your shaping magic to protect your allies.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool. You're spell shaping and kind of shifting and manipulating those magical forces away, in different directions. Like that's cool flavor. That's cool role playing. But it's also a tangible mechanism that the sorcerers have to kind of play with their spells.
It's a very interesting class. One that, like Chris and I said, we've never personally been able to play. Probably fix that pretty soon. Would you say, so a sorcerer would you say that they are single dependent, multi-dependent?
Yeah, so with a sorcerer, you're just, all you need is your charisma, and then you just...
So that's another difference. They are a charisma spellcaster, not intel, not wisdom. Next up, we have the warlock, which is my personal favorite class. The warlock is a wielder of eldritch power. They are a being who made a deal to get magic. So similar to the sorcerer, they didn't go to wizard school. They didn't spend their best years studying ancient tomes. They don't devote themselves to a god. They found a patron to break off a piece of their power and give it to them.
They cut a
and
deal.
That cut a deal. And that's kind of, if you want to break the class down into an essence, that is the essence for me of a warlock. They are deal makers.
Yeah.
These are people who made a deal with the devil, Cthulhu, kind of ancient fae, whatever it is, and got a piece of power for whatever they gave up. Now, they may regret that. They may not.
Yeah.
They may still be cool with that choice.
That gives a lot of really cool role-playing options as well.
Yes. And that is something that I think a lot of people misunderstand about warlocks. If I am a warlock and the fiend is my patron, I don't necessarily have to be evil. I don't necessarily have to do what the fiend would do on the mortal plane.
Yeah.
A lot of times, and it's up to you and your DM, a lot of times the patrons kind of don't care. They don't care what you do. But when they call on you, they want you to be there to, to do a thing, do whatever they want you to do. But in your day-to-day, I can still be, a lawful good warlock with an evil patron. And that might add a little more conflict and more role-playing and more fun, more spice to your character.
Think about characters and stories. Stories are only compelling and characters are only compelling when they're forced to change.
Mm-hmm.
Something comes up that tests them and forces them to change or grow. So when you have a conflicted character like that, it gives a lot of juicy opportunities for that to happen. And then from the DM perspective, if you've got a warlock in your party or a paladin or any, kind of class that has some kind of strong affinity to a patron or a god or something, what happens if that's challenged or tested?
Yeah.
Or even taken away? That can be an incredible way to engage your players, just make the story connect and make them become invested in it.
So warlocks do suffer from very limited resources. They only have a couple spell slots they can use, but they get them back at a short rest, whereas a wizard has a lot of spell slots, or at least a lot more, but they get them back every long rest. So depending on your campaign, for whatever reason, the campaigns we play, we don't take a lot of short rests. So I am very stingy with my spell slots. As a warlock, you have what I consider and many consider to be the very best cantrip in the whole game, an Eldritch Blast, and you can augment it to make it do more damage, so you don't have to really use your spell slots that often. And then you can look at your spell list and maybe find some utility, because your damage is pretty much covered with your cantrips.
Yeah, and with Eldritch Blast in particular, this might be a fun thing to get into a little bit. We talked a little bit about, one-trick ponies, and because the Warlock has limited spell slots, and depending on just the game flow and session, you might not be able to get those back all the time. So in some of the instances where, there's been an Eldritch Blast Warlock in the party, all they do is Eldritch Blast, and that's just, like, it didn't seem like they were as engaged, because it was just like, it's your turn in combat, Eldritch Blast. Because they're 60 feet away anyways. They're not in any real danger. So, in between checking phone updates. Eldritch Blast it. Okay, it hits.
Yeah. The Warlock, I don't think you're ever going to run into the same Warlock twice. Between the patrons, the different packs, the different Eldritch invocations, there's just so many different combinations.
There's a lot of really cool options. Eldritch Blast is so good that it's a very popular choice.
Yeah, it's a meme at this point. You have to take it. It's the highest damaging cantrip in the game. It outdoes some like martial weapons. It's an incredible spell, but you also, to keep that in mind, you have to add Eldritch invocations to it. So you have to add more resources to it to make it that good.
Yeah.
If I'm going to do that, I'm going to use it.
Oh, of course, yeah. But there's so many different ways to build a really cool Warlock. I think a lot of them sometimes get overshadowed because Eldritch Blast is so good.
Yes, that, and I would also say the maybe I would consider it a flaw. The flaw of the Warlock is everybody wants to play at a specific kind of edgelord, maybe the Rogue too.
Yeah,
they're loners, they're chaotic evil, they're tieflings, they're, and I see why people, when they look at that class, that's kind of the stereotypical, we've talked about what is the stereotypical paladin, druid, whatever. That is maybe the stereotypical Warlock. And they suffered, I think, at a table greatly from that reputation. They don't have to be like that.
No,
even if you chose an evil patron. So a part of me, I always think, like, why why did this person make this pack? I think that's very important when you're making your warlock. I think more important than why does my cleric worship and devote their life to this deity? Why did you go out of your way to find something that's usually on the evil side of the spectrum?
Yeah.
To make this deal? What did you need? What drove you to that? Was it just ambition? Was it desperation? Did your grandparents do that and their whole bloodline is cursed now? You know, there are a lot of ways to figure out your character when you're making a warlock that don't necessarily need you to be just the brooding, dark, evil character.
Yeah.
Like, you can resent your ancestor for cursing you with this.
Yeah, you didn't ask for that. Breaking the mold in that way applies to warlocks, but it applies to any of these classes, because you can
really does.
Yeah, you can go very, archetypical and cookie cutter, or you can really try and breathe some life into these classes and really push them, push their boundaries, push their limits, push your creative boundaries, and see what amazing things you can create. That's the really, within these kind of frameworks and limitations, there's still a lot of room for customization and flexibility.
So last but certainly not least, we have the wizard, the scholarly, in search of the arcane magic wielder is more of the stereotypical mage magic wielder that you tend to think of when you think of those types of archetypes. Wizards gain their access to arcane through scholarly study. So they're scholarly magic users. When you're thinking of your character, usually wizards are a little older because they've spent decades studying.
Yep.
What has that done to your character? What types of mannerisms did they pick up at school? And I tend to think of it as like mage's college. Yeah. They easily could have been in a hut somewhere and just had a stack of books and practice by themselves. It doesn't, again, necessarily have to be, I went to wizard school and graduated summa cum laude.
Or you have the acolyte who, strikes off to seek arcane knowledge on their own.
Yeah. Did you get expelled first year?
Yeah.
So now you still want to be a wizard, but you got to do it on your own terms. I mean, you're level 1, so you're obviously not in a great accredited wizard of great acclaim. So that's another, maybe you're trying to regain some honor, or maybe you're hot-headed and that's why you got kicked out. There's a lot of different ways to play the wizard. The wizard is obviously spell damage, ranged spell damage. They have some utility, they have some support, but the wizard is a spellcasting class.
Yeah. I mean, they have their spell book is exhaustive. One of the great things about the wizard is you can change and update that pretty regularly, your spell book. Other classes might have to commit spells to memory, and once you select them, that's it. But wizards can have as many spell books as they want, or as they can afford. And in those, you can have different spells that are available to you, so you can change your loadout essentially on the fly. The disadvantage to that is if that spell book is destroyed, well, now you're hosed. Yeah. Which is a mechanic that is really interesting when the DM snatches your spell book from you. Yeah. that's a wizard's worst nightmare.
And it's another one of those things that we talked about with like the patron or with the deity. Like, what grants you your power and what does your character do if that's threatened? Like, that's an easy thread to pull and find a lot of cool stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And
one of the things I really like about wizards, if you find a spell scroll, you can put it in your spell book. So that just gives them another thing they're after, another resource they're questing for.
Yeah.
That other classes can't do. You get a scroll, you use it, that's gone.
Yep.
The wizard can inscribe it into their spell book at the cost of some time and some money. And then they get that spell. That's a new spell they have. So if you're a collector, that's a good motivation. I need to go out into the wild and find these scrolls because I want to catch them all. I want all these spells in my book. And it's a really nice kind of motivation or motivator to get your wizard out into the woods.
Yeah.
Where they probably aren't happy to be.
No, definitely not a wizard. if you think about it from the DM perspective too, if you know you have a wizard, throwing in those little things like a spell scroll or, you know, a rod or something like that can, you know, give that inciting thing to really hook a wizard player. And it's good to think about that for all the classes. What different, you know, items or plot hooks or things can you use to motivate those characters, those classes to, you know, get them into a story, push them on to the next thing, or create tension.
Yes.
So if anything, you know, I hope that we've been able to break down these classes, highlight, you know, a lot of their strengths and weaknesses, and then, you know, allow you to give you some different tools and mindsets to customize and breathe more character into these classes to really create a character that you're going to enjoy and that's going to create, you know, help you create meaningful sessions, you know, at your table.
These are just a few approaches to picking a class, but we want to hear about yours. Let us know how you pick your classes and what tools you use in the comment section below.
Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click that notification bell. It updates you on new episodes and goes a long way in supporting the show. Subscribe to the newsletter and get new content and exclusive bonuses delivered straight to your inbox. Never spam! Stay tuned for the next part of our ongoing character creation series, where we talk about alignment. Thanks for watching.
And we'll catch you next time.